You know, we live in a world obsessed with speed. We measure success by how much we can produce, how fast we can scale, how efficient we can be. But here's the thing, when it comes to people, sometimes there is a cost to efficiency. There are side effects to a focus on metrics, unintended consequences to spreadsheets and outcome-driven programs. That's why today's conversation is so compelling for me. It takes us into a community that refuses to play by the rules of mass production, a place where presence matters more than productivity, where the question isn't how many, but who's here, and how can we build from what is? What happens when you build a church not around programs, but around people? I mean, I've heard that so often said, but do we reckon with how hard that is to do in our world today? When you let relationships, not strategies, set the pace, and when you choose to stay even when the work is long and the outcomes can't be measured. That's the story we're stepping into today with my guest, Rachel Tulloch. Rachel works with Sanctuary Toronto, a church and community in our city that centers people who often don't feel welcomed anywhere else. Sanctuary does run programs, but its heartbeat is community itself, learning to live along one another. A place that reminds us that what we all long for most isn't just services, but connection, friendship, and home. I begin our conversation asking, what is lost when we seek greater efficiency and production in the social service sector? So let's dive in.
I think what you lose when you constantly follow the sort of trajectory that our society will always have towards bigger and better and faster and more efficient, is that often you lose the heart of what it was that you were trying to make bigger or better or faster or more efficient in the first place. Because many of the things that, you know, in a community like Sanctuary or in the communities that we work in, the heart that makes them what they are has to do more with relationship. It has to do more with the particular textures and local context of the place that you're in and the people that you're with, and the people that you're working alongside and the neighborhood that you're in. And you have to be rooted and know those things really well and be able to, yes, adapt certain structures around it. But you're adapting those structures around particular people and particular contexts and particular places. The bigger you get, the harder that is to do, and the more those relationships and those uniquenesses and those particular personalities get lost in the structures.
Yeah, and the particularities is all about contextualization, right? You're trying to contextualize to a specific person, to a specific group of people, and the place you work in is Sanctuary, and the Sanctuary Ministry is all about the people who come there is what makes it. To me, it's not necessarily a program for homeless first. It's actually a community first, and then you build perhaps maybe programs around it.
Yes,
but it's not a program that has an accessory of a community, and it's not necessarily developing relational rapport, with people in order to get to an outcome for a program. It is like a community first.
Yes.
And I think that's when you get really lost in the loss is when you start with program or when you start with something universal. And then you try to fit this universal program to the particularities of your community.
Yes.
Rather than looking at the particularities of the community and then growing something out of that.
Yes.
Which will look maybe very different than a lot of other programs out there that might be more successful, for example, right?
So successful by a certain standard.
Yeah.
And so, I think when I talk about a difference between, say, the way Sanctuary chooses to do something in other places, it's not necessarily to say it's better. It's just to say that because we are trying to have community first, there's many things we do that might look very similar. Our meal drop-in, for instance, probably doesn't look that different than any other
meal
drop-in in the city, right? But it does mean that in small ways we'll make different choices maybe that are less efficient, but that still try to maintain the things that really matter to us, which are face-in-face encounters with people across a table, rather than just dishing out as much food as you can to feed as many people as you can. We're trying to create a space where people actually engage with each other, where people are known, where people have a place to sit down at the table, the family dinner table in a sense, and to serve the person beside them and to get to know the person beside them, maybe to fight over that last piece of food on the plate, because that's what it means to be together around the table. And so there's probably more efficient ways you could serve food than the way that we do. And we will make choices. It's not against efficiency. We will make choices to do things more efficiently when we see something's not working or something's causing a problem. But we really never want to make that choice at the cost of the particular people and the space for relationships and being that matters to us.
I think the word cost is important because we tend to not factor in the particularities of someone as a cost necessarily, because cost benefit analysis is usually done based on numerical mass data understanding of trends or whatnot. And those trends are a lot of people, and is in a way going into the universal aspects of how we conduct program. I think it's good for people listening to understand the dynamics of Sanctuary Ministries. And if anyone is listening, you can always hear back to some of the things that I talked to Greg Paul about. But in what you're saying there, for example, the idea of, having food around a table as a family style kind of thing versus like a line getting the food, that is a strategy that you created as a result of your community, right? And that's a value that was take place. And I think what in thinking today, in our talk today, my focus is on the cost to efficiencies and the idea of how we could do a lot of things to make things more productive, or we could make a lot of these measures. And for me, I thought I can do a lot of that when I was working at Evergreen, to do both the efficiencies and the relational kind of being with people, and in your words, it's just the fermenting with others, just being with others for a long time in a sustained way. What do you think is the reason why the mass production of it or the efficiencies has become so naturalized in the social sector more and more now? Or would you argue that it is the case?
I think it is the case. I mean, I don't have statistics or anything to prove that, but from my experience, I do think it's the case. And I think it's natural because of the world that we live in. Efficiency and doing things bigger and better and having more of them, they're just values that our society holds. And so we absorb them without thinking about it. And often we don't even understand what the cost of that is. So we think we're measuring one cost against the other. You make a certain choice, and a few years later you realize, oh, we've lost something. We've lost something that's really hard to get back in making that choice. Because so much of the deep relational work that we do, and so much of what happens in the encounters between human beings that is made possible by time and space and presence, what happens in those encounters is not something it's not an outcome that we control, but it's something that gets lost when we cut out the time and the space for those relationships and those encounters. The time that it takes to cultivate presence, the time that it takes to build trust with people, the time that it takes to do the inner work required to sustain this work over the long haul without doing harm, for instance. All of those things require time and space, and they don't have immediate results or immediate outcomes that you can point to. If you only made decisions about your programs based on how many people were impacted or what sorts of results you can measure, there's a lot of things you lose that you don't know you're losing. So, for instance, we every year for the last few years, we've taken the time as a group of people to go frog catching with someone in the community who has a particular obsession with frogs. You could never design a program like that from the top down. Like nobody would ever read a book and say, okay, frog catching is a good program to have in a community. You only have that in a community where you have a froggy, like we do.
Yeah.
And you actually take the time to know that person and to say, oh, here's an opportunity to do something really quirky that's based on this person. Nonetheless, we had like 15 other people in the community that also went on that frog catching trip, and it was great fun for everybody involved. But that's a particularity that you only would see based on the uniqueness of a particular person, you know.
And so then if we were to think it in an industrial kind of way, usually you would say, hey, this frog program is doing pretty well.
Oh, yeah.
We got a lot of people going. Let's make some frog posters and let's make this like an annual thing, or let's make this a regular monthly endeavor.
Right.
And then suddenly frog, observing. No, you're catching frogs. What are you doing here?
Catching.
You're catching. Okay. Doing that becomes like, okay, let's figure out how to, mass produce this, or let's figure out how to duplicate this in different places. Mm-hmm. But in a way, there is a limit because of the particularity of it. There's a limit to how much you can do that for. Like, is it possible, for us to just do things and it just extinguish? Like, is it possible, right, for us to just do something like that? You actually put time in it. You have like staff going to that. Yeah. You had to organize around it. Yeah. You probably gave an email. You can use all those things perhaps for templates in the future. Mm-hmm. But what if it was just that, right? Mm-hmm. I remember in my research, I was, I think Hannah Arendt was referring to Karl Marx and Adam Smith in their perspective of labor. Right. And she was talking about the fact that both of them, in their views, saw that there's productive labor, people who contribute to the economy, and the way they determine productivity, both of them, productivity is if it had some sustainable, reproducible element to it. Mm-hmm. And they contrast that to slave work. Slaves who work, or people who are working in that element, is that they would make the food, or they would do those tasks, and they would extinguish right away. And then they made a distinction. She made a distinction in this about how slave work is considered non-productive work. Mm-hmm. And then there is a labor that is that can be, codified and can be reproduced. Right. And I got to tell you, like, and based on what you're just saying there too, I didn't realize it, but I began to make those distinctions in different staff who were doing things in, say, the drop-in, who did work that I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to package this. Like, I don't know. This is just, it's beautiful, but that's it. It's only impacting that one person. Right. And there's a lot of time putting into that one thing, right? And then I need more of the, production side of thing. I need the worker who's actually going to do that, but also like give me some templates for the work later. And I realized afterwards, number one, it's really hard to do both. And number two, I wonder if the side of the work that is scaling, or the side of the work that is templating things, how much that does prevent us from being fully present with someone in the moment, I feel like there's a lot to explore with what you lose and the costs that occurs when you move from that, in a way, unproductive work to productive work.
And I think sometimes you lose even the very thing you're trying to reproduce.
Yes.
Unintentionally. And I noticed this, the church background that I grew up in really had an allergic reaction to any kind of liturgical repetition. So they tried to do everything spontaneously, and everything had to be moved by the Spirit, or not planned in some sense. But you started to realize as a kid growing up in that environment, you would still hear the same people saying the same sorts of things over and over and over again. And so this gathering that was supposed to be fully spontaneous and led by the Spirit and not controlled by planning just had the same sorts of repetitions, but just more poorly thought through or whatever. And I think, even at Sanctuary, sometimes we've tried really hard to retain, because Sanctuary didn't start as a program or an organization. It actually started organically as a group of people getting together, creating unlikely relationships with each other, sitting down and cooking together and eating together. And as it grew, and we were forced to find some structures to build around it to allow more people to join into the community. We tried in many ways to retain that same organic heart that you had at the beginning. But you realize sometimes I say doing the same thing doesn't do the same thing. So where Jesus told his disciples to wash each other's feet, or Jesus said that, serving is better than being served, he was saying that in a particular context to particular people who didn't, where serving had a particular low status that came with it. People didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays we're in an environment where often serving is done by the people with more status or with more resources.
Yes.
The serving and the giving. And so it doesn't have the same countercultural effect to be the server or the giver.
Yes.
Which is why Sanctuary in its early days tried to reverse that back again and say, oh no, actually, if you're the person with more status and with more resources and you come into our community to serve or help or give, you're just actually going to be asked to sit down at the table and be served and receive and be given to, because that is the countercultural thing in this context.
Yes.
Which is trying to still be faithful to the things Jesus said, but it's actually reversing the instructions a little bit. And over time, I would say even at Sanctuary, we've had to figure out different ways of even doing those reversals, because sometimes you realize doing this the same way is no longer doing the same thing. It's no longer accomplishing the same thing because our context has changed. Yeah, so I think it's a constant... I think you can learn from models, you can learn from other places, you can learn lessons, but I think it's really hard to reproduce something that's about particular relationships, particular individuals, and particular contexts. It's really hard to reproduce that. And so, you can reproduce something like a McDonald's and maybe change the nature of the menu based on your context, because it's not about the people who make it up. And it's really not even about anything about the local place where it exists. But things that are about community, about neighborhood, about people, about relationships, very hard to reproduce.
It's hard to be original for everything, right? Just like what you were saying. I remember many times I've done this as a preacher, where I get up on the stage, like I was going to preach this message, but the Lord spoke to me, and I have a word from the Lord. And then it just felt like, oh, everyone's like going to listen then, because it's so fresh. And there's this desire for originality, and in a way, a movement away from the liturgy or something that is a common prayer that is like prescribed, because it feels performative, it feels prescriptive, right? So in a way, there's an avoidance of that. And then yes, there's a desire to do that. But in what you were saying with regards to that, so back in Sanctuary, if you felt like there was something original and beautiful there, and the desire to maintain that originality, are you saying that it is good that there is some liturgy, or there is some pattern, or there is some template to somewhat lean upon, because you can't always be creating, or like in a way you can't always be like the Lord thus says this, Is there a need for some of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think there is. But I think those structures that you put in place, they're more like containers. They're more like the infrastructure that holds the thing that I think is
Yes.
what we all actually value.
Scaffolding.
Yeah. It creates the space and the conditions for which relationship and encounter and all of the things that we really value in our community happen. So you cannot avoid some structures, but when those structures start to take over, when they start to squelch the very thing they were meant to create space for or meant to foster, then you need the flexibility to be able to adjust and change and move those things. The bigger that you get, the less flexibility you have to make those adjustments as you go. And so I think it's a bit of a rhythm between, yeah, you do have sometimes spontaneous, original things that are good. Then you always, in order to keep it going, need to create some structures around them. So, eventually we had to decide on what day we were going to have our meal. Originally, they were just gathering and making meals together. At some point, you create a bit of a schedule and you tell people when it's going to be, and you create these structures to make it repeatable. We repeat it, every Tuesday and Thursday at this point.
That's right.
And that's not a bad thing. It gives a rhythm to our weekly life together. It gives people something they can count and rely on. We have the building to have space to host it. All of those things are institutional structures that try to make to hold space for the community life. But when those structures start to squelch the community life or take precedence over the community life, I think that's when that's when the real cost comes in and you start to lose something. And if you're at a size and a scale that you're still in tune with that, then people notice when the structure is starting to infringe upon the relationships and the heart of community life. And that's when you say, hey, this thing we were doing is just not working anymore. Yeah. So can we make these adjustments or these changes? And you need to be nimble enough to do that.
Yeah. I think knowing when a structure is stifling the life of the community is extremely hard to know when. It's hard to detect that and have the courage to stop something.
Yes.
Or to pivot or to edit or to adjust. Knowing that nuance is very important. So I would say, based on what you're saying, there's kind of two sides of the pendulum. There's one side that is desiring for originality, spontaneity, improvisation. There's the other side that desires stability, clarity, understanding boundary, understanding where the edges are. And I find that usually in the conversation and community work, it's a battle between those two things,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I would say for someone who leans more towards this organic, I want it to be fresh and I want it to be, new and, founded by the Spirit, inspired by it. That side I have come to realize is exhausting at times.
Yeah.
Because you have to invent every single time. So if you really lean towards the particularity of someone, yeah, it's really good to have a very unique approach to someone as they walk through the doors of your drop-in or whatnot. You engage with them and you're like, okay, I got to think blank slate. What does this person have to offer? What are they bringing here right now? How do I respond to this? I'm not going to use my padded answers or my scripts from before. I'm going to this is improvisation right now. And to improvise every single day and create, plans with them of what their next steps are to, move away from this destructive kind of path to a different one. Doing that every single time, I find is can be weary, but then I also know that if someone comes in and I'm saying, fill out this intake form and, fill out this intake form so that I can know what my approach with you to be, that side doesn't feel right as well, right? It feels quite formulaic. How have you found the balance in all of these things and in figuring out where the nuance in that is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm certainly not claiming that we've found the right balance. I think it's been a constant, I would say, sort of collective discernment all along the way. And you're never actually going to have, I mean, we never even have all of our staff agree on these things, let alone our entire community. And yet somehow we keep moving forward and holding these things in tension. And I think it's the ability to do that that keeps us going. It's the ability to hold those things in tension. Sometimes we probably swing too far one way, and sometimes we probably swing too far the other way. I don't think there's ever been a time where we didn't at least all say that our collective value was the community ahead of programs or services or whatever particular things that we do, that the value of being a community together, of mutual care and mutual learning and mutual giving and receiving, that was always the priority. And so we might judge differently how to get there, but that was all a value that we all said that we held and still do. And so I think there's a lot of wrestling that goes into making those decisions, and we're still making them, all of the time. And sometimes we'll hear from our community as well, like they'll say this. Sometimes the staff will make a particular decision for whatever reason, one direction, and then we'll hear back from the community, no, this doesn't feel like us anymore. Mm-hmm. You've made these decisions, but we don't feel at home here anymore.
Yes.
And that's happened over the last few years, where we've had to really reckon with the fact that actually our community was giving us feedback that was different than what we thought as staff was the best way to go on a particular situation. And so navigating that way.
Yeah. So, how have you understood how to function in this world where outcomes and producing outcomes and results, the pressures around in our social sector, how has that impacted you, and how has your desire for just being patient and going the long route with people, how have you negotiated that?
Well, I think it's been certainly a learning process for me. I've told you before that I think when I started this work as a young person, I was very much shaped and framed by narratives that I'd been given, both in my upbringing in the church and youth circles that I was a part of, that very much valued the big gestures, the big transformative stories, the world-changing ambitions that as a teenager I had of, changing things for the better. And I think when you get in this work with those big ideas of how you want the world to be changed, and you start to realize that the work is not that glamorous and the outcomes are not nearly as flashy as what you'd hoped for. Not even just flashy, not as transformative as what you'd hoped for, and you actually realize that you're going to be in for a lot of heartbreak over the long haul. You're actually going to have to reckon with your own shadow side and admit all the mistakes and failures that you've made along the way. You're actually going to have to see the same problems over and over again without knowing how to fix them. You're going to be choosing to show up again and again and again without seeing necessarily the visible outcomes that you would want to. You're going to feel like what you do is a drop in the bucket in the suffering and injustice of the world around you, and you're just going to have to choose to keep on going in the midst of that. You recalibrate through those experiences what success looks like, what transformation looks like, what your expectations are of both of the people that you work with, of yourself, of the world and the community around you. You start to see and hope for transformation differently just because you learn what it means to do it on the ground.
And so then the long haul of being patient in it, can we say that we can be too patient?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I think it depends on how you define patience. So we're used to thinking of patience as a very passive thing, just sort of sitting back and waiting for something to happen. That kind of patience is, it's better reserved for the grocery line when you have to wait.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to do much in our world, where actually the important tasks that we're called to require doing things. But what I'm talking about is the patience to do things, not to do nothing, to do things, but to do small things faithfully over the long haul. And that doesn't even mean that it will only be small things, or that the transformation you see will only ever be small and incremental. A lot of times it is, and that's something we have to learn to walk alongside. But I think it's also about, over the long haul, becoming the type of people, becoming the type of communities who can rise to the occasion to do the big things when we're called to do them, to make the big sacrifices when we're called to do them. But those are not just something that, we all, maybe not all of us, but some of us dream when we're younger of being those people that you read about in the books who did those grand sacrificial gestures, the Dorothy Days of the world or something. But in order to be the sort of people who can do those things when we're called to do them, it requires a lot of doing small things over a long period of time that no one sees and that no one recognizes, and that maybe don't result in any visible outcome at the time. And then you become the type of person who knows when that call.
Yes. That's how you
when
discern.
you are called.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember hearing Dorothy Day's granddaughter speak about her one time, and the picture that she painted of the community was much less idealized than what we often might think of or hear when we hear her name, or when we talk about the Catholic worker movement, which we know has these visible results and has spread around the world. But her granddaughter at one point said, like, oh no, all the way along, she just thought everything was a mess. It was just slogging through a mess the whole time. And it was a community member at Sanctuary who had brought me to this talk. And she said this line to me, like, oh yeah, maybe the mess is the work. You think you have to tolerate some mess to do the work.
Yes.
Maybe the mess is the work. Maybe that's what we're called to do over the long haul. And that might sound kind of like a slogan, There's a lot of slogans that the mess is the work, or stay with the trouble. And they sound slogany, but I think they're true. And I think the living them out is a lot. It's not as nice as the slogan sounds. It's actually pretty hard work over the long haul, and a willingness to tolerate a lot of disappointment and failure and stuff along the way. Yeah.
And maybe my question is flawed, because there's the question of how to do, and then in a way your answer, if I were to rephrase the question, is how to be, right?
Yes.
Patience is a virtue. Patience is something that we become more patient. It's not that we are patient. It's we become patient. And in a way, what you're saying with regards to a community becoming a patient community,
yes,
then out of the being of patience, you are patient.
yes,
And that is the only way. I mean, this is virtue ethics 101, right? This is the idea of, and what you were mentioning about habits over time, or the incremental small tasks of what you do, and you repeat it over and over again. It becomes a part of your being, so that when the moment arises, then you can be it when it counts. Right? It's hard to consciously be patient in a heightened moment that is very emotional, and then to activate it consciously. You have to, it has to come as a visceral reaction. It has to become at a reflex that you're not even thinking about, an unconscious way of being that allows it to come forward. And unless it's repeated, you can be an organization that knows how to do things, or you can be an organization that knows how to be it. And so that's why like best practices feels shallow to me a lot of the times. This is the best practice, assuming that the practice of it is gonna be. But if we're not being formed by it, like if you are not, if you come to Sanctuary and you are not served in a certain way, you're lacking part of the being in the community, right? Because if you just came here and say, this is how we execute service with dignity.
Yes.
This is the tactics. This is the way how you do it. Then you're doing it. And in a way, it's performative. That's why I see a lot of that. I see it myself too. Like my humility can be performative, but am I humble? Is my being humble?
Yeah.
Because I know how to be humble. Yeah. I'm really good at knowing how to be humble, or how to do humility. But being humble is really tough.
Yeah. And often it's not something you've chosen. Like sometimes being humble comes from having been humiliated.
That's right.
And nobody chooses that. Nobody wants that. But it happens. It's part of that becoming. One of the things I really like about Sanctuary is that, when the staff crafted the mission statement, again, they crafted it along the way to describe what they were doing rather than deciding at the outset, here's our mission statement and here's what we're going to do. It was more like, okay, what is it we're actually doing as a community? And then they wrote it down. And they very carefully chose the words, we are becoming a healthy and welcoming community, instead of just saying we are, because we are always becoming. And we become not by trying harder to do the right thing, although hopefully we do try hard to do the right thing. But what actually shapes us, what actually makes us become are these vulnerable encounters we have with others and with the world that change us, and they change all of us. It's not a one-way direction, and they change all of us in ways that we didn't always ask for, or that bring outcomes that maybe we didn't want in our own lives. And through all those things, we are shaped and we become people, hopefully, who can look back over time and say, oh yeah, we have become in these ways, or we have learned these things and we've learned them together. And boy, in the moment when I was going through that, it didn't feel like a good thing, but.
Yes. That's why I guess that makes sense then to think about reflection as a important practice in thinking about how to do something in the future.
Yes.
Like doing reflection on your past allows you to look from the present, looking back at things that perhaps you intended to do. You might have practiced a habit and really developed a discipline that enabled you to have the virtue of whatever that is.
Yeah.
But reflection also looks at those things that you did not intend to go through, such as being humiliated, and then drawing from that humility in understanding the being of it, right? I think that's very different. I mean, that's really different than the aspirations and then, like, in a way, being controlled over having so much control over my character.
Yes.
My character development is like very purposeful, and I set the path for my character. My target for this kind of character, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And how much of that is actually done unconsciously, done by accident, and done to you, actually, is very surprising. There's probably so much that has happened that has formed us. Yeah. And I think that works for, number one, the practice of what we do, the virtue that comes out of us. But what you said there about mission statement is really important too, because normally that's how we think too. We think very frontier mentality as well, where we're thinking, okay, what's our mission statement? This is where we want to go. Let's figure out how we can do it. Because we think we're so audacious to think that we can figure that out. Rather than looking at the past, seeing what has happened, knowing who we are as a people, and crafting a mission based on that, or an ethos of who we are based on that, rather than always looking at the aspiration. Like, aspirations is good in some way because it pushes us, but it takes for granted what happens to us. Like, that is important for us to reckon with.
Yeah, and I did talk about a little bit about this in my dissertation, and I think I would have written it differently probably if I wrote it now. But I did talk about that interplay between the habits that we cultivate intentionally as a community that we live out over and over the long haul, but then the openness to have those habits disrupted by things that are out of our control. And what does it mean to have a rhythm of developing solid habits, but also the openness to be disrupted and to be vulnerable enough to be changed despite those, so that they don't become rigid. And I talked about a little bit in the context of our worship, how, the gathering together around a table, the breaking bread and the taking of wine is a habit that we do. It's something we set up every week. We buy the stuff, we gather together, we have a time set for it. But there's space within that for it to be challenged. So it's on more than one occasion we've had people come in who are going through great pain and suffering in their life, who have either come up and, drank the whole glass of wine off the communion table. In one case, someone smashed the glass of wine on the table. And it disrupts the sort of control that you would have around that habit or that rhythm. But it does something true and faithful to that practice of communion that we're trying to accomplish. So we develop those habits for a reason.
Yes.
We're trying to do them for the sake of communion. That's why we call it communion. And those disruptions are also part of communion. They're about being vulnerable enough, the way Jesus was vulnerable enough to have his flesh torn and his blood spilled out. If we are vulnerable enough as a community to have those things we hold dear disrupted, there's something about that shapes and changes us as well. That being said, if, someone comes in and smashes the wine glass every week, then that becomes the new habit and you've lost something, right?
Yes.
So it's not easy to find where is that rhythm between boundaries and habits and intentionality and the vulnerability of allowing those things to be broken apart or changed or shifted or disrupted or whatever. It can't be all one or all the other.
That's right. And I think if you are in chaos or you're constantly being disrupted, it's hard to find. It's kind of sometimes feels like, why do we even have a habit anyways? It just keeps getting disrupted over and over again. That's the same thing with policies. We create policies. They just keep changing anyways.
Yes.
Because the population that comes is so dynamic that why don't we just improv everything, right? In a way, it says that. But it's necessary. And I think there's many people who come to community programs that they need rhythm. They need structure actually as part of it, because the rest of life is chaos, or the rest of life is unstable. So the stability provides something. And I think it's important to know how much stability to put in that can work with the disruptions that perhaps happen. But I think onto what you're saying is that I'm really getting is that you need stability. You need, in a way, for yourself in your own formation, there needs to be some sense of stability in order to even say, be intentional with your life. Like if you don't have any stability in your life, it's hard to be intentional. And I think for those who don't have stability in your life, whether you are on the margins or not, or whether you're just like myself, if I don't have stability, and I tend to, like my personal self, like I have a lot of stability in my life. I have a home, I have, rhythms in my family, I do all these things. So I think in the world of intentionality and character building, completely based on it's on me. It's all my choice and my intentionality, whether I want to develop this discipline and this habit that's going to form me into having this virtue of becoming. right? But what I'm really getting from you right now is if we take into consideration many people who don't have, they might want to be intentional, but actually they shouldn't take for granted all of the things that are happening to them that is forming them. And it's a waste to think that that's all like bad and like, I wish I was more intentional. No, there's a lot of things that happen to you that make you something, make you more empathetic, make you more patient, make you all these different things that I would say for people who are workers on the front line who have lived experience, that word lived experience that we use all the time don't take that for granted. That is like, in a way, gold. It doesn't feel like it. It probably is very painful, but there's something very powerful about that I haven't necessarily named until you said that, what you're saying there. It's important to acknowledge that is part of why certain people just beam with this thing that you can't describe. Like there's certain workers that I feel like I don't know how to like codify you. Like I have no idea how to like replicate you. You're just like this gem of a person that is made for this. And when you walk in the room, everyone feels something. There's some people who just have that I don't think was necessarily, maybe it was purposeful in their life, but I imagine a lot of it they experienced and they became something that is, and I think it's important to name that because it's hard to like say everyone be like that. You can't all be like that because you lived a different life. You experienced something different.
Yeah. And that's why communities themselves too take on the character, not just of that one person, but of all the different sorts of people that make up a particular community. And if I could think of like, okay, who are my favorite people in our community or something. But if you turned everybody into those people, it would not be the same community. And even those people wouldn't be the same people because we also are who we are in relationship with each other. And so the people who maybe have an extra gift at being open and welcoming, and maybe they're not so great at holding a boundary, they're able to be that way because there's probably somebody else holding the boundary and not...
Poor boundary sitter.
And maybe not everyone likes them as much as this
Who likes
person,
that?
right? And so there's just all these dynamics that happen when we come together as people and different people and changing people and people in a changing world where, the same thing that worked 10 years ago doesn't work anymore. And all those things weave together to make a community what it is and to make a person who they are. And not only can you not replicate that, we can't even trace or map all of those things, right? And I think that's partly why presence, like practicing presence, is so important, because to say that we're practicing presence, we're not actually describing or prescribing very much about what that presence looks like, because it's going to look different for a different person. It's going to look different in a different situation. But presence means that we're showing up as the people we are, and hopefully we're showing up truly in relationship with someone else and with the world around us, so that we're open to being changed as well, and that presence looks different over time. But when that presence shuts down for one reason or another, we stop showing up. We stop being able to show up. Then that's, I think, where the actual problem comes in. And sometimes that's that we no longer have created the conditions as a community. Maybe it is the structures of our community life are quelching our ability to be present with each other for whatever reason. And you try and shift those. Maybe it's that you actually haven't taken the time, or like we haven't created the structures in our own lives for reflection, for rest, for caring for ourselves as well. So our presence shuts down because, we need those things as human beings to sustain presence. And so a community that holds all of that is never going to be the most efficient, the most high producing, the most outcome focused community.
Yeah.
They just don't work together.
Yeah, Rachel, my mind is going in so many places in this conversation, but I think that when I was introduced into this world in urban ministry and thinking through how to be present, I was encountering the word presence ministry, or the ministry of presence. That felt like, oh, that's interesting, because it doesn't feel very programmatic. It doesn't feel like you're just producing something. It feels like something more earthy and organic, which is good. But it also was hard to define.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard for me to know what presence ministry was. The only thing in my head when I thought of presence ministry in the drop-in center I was like playing pool with people, playing foosball, which I really love doing with them, and eating, really. Or I would say doing an accompaniment with someone, like to, for court, or to go to an appointment somewhere, and walking and journeying with them. That's good. Those are, like, in a way, the practices of ministry of presence.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing from you right now, it makes me think that ministry of presence is about letting someone's being, like giving some air and giving some space for someone's being to be expressed.
Yes.
You can't, it's hard to do that in an appointment-based transactional engagement, because my being doesn't necessarily come out when I'm communicating a script or being, in a way, performative in a way of engaging with someone. Of course, it can come out there, but your true being comes when it's kind of passive time together, right? There's something about that comes out of you that's different, that someone is able to see, that the patience comes out, all these virtues come out, and you need room for that to come out.
Yes.
And it's really hard for that to come out in very finite, segmented categories.
And thank you for just describing it that way, because that's actually partly what I mean by presence. It's not just about me individually having the virtue of patience.
Yes.
It's about us collectively being patient enough to allow that air and that space for us to all become together, so that those moments when I'm not patient, where I lose it and do something I shouldn't do because I wasn't patient, that I still have the chance to show up again and again and again, despite that. That's the sort of patience that I'm talking about. And it's something that can't be just individually acquired. It's something we have to, a priority that we choose together to allow that space and that time for us to become together. And I've also heard the word ministry of presence used, and I don't have a problem with it, although sometimes I think the way I hear it described is like, my presence is something I give you. Here's my ministry. I'm going to give you my presence.
Jesse's presence is here. You're welcome.
Yeah. Which at times, even in our community at Sanctuary, I found funny, because we talk about friendships and the importance of developing friendships. The truth is, not everybody wants to be my friend. Gosh, why would they, right? Like, maybe they're in the community for a whole other reason than that they want to be friends with me. I do have friends. I have very deep, good friendships. But the texture of the community is built of more than that as well. Because my presence is not just something I offer. It's a way of being together where we learn to be present to each other, whether or not we even like each other, whether or not in this moment things are going well, whether or not, it's presence is, it's something that we practice and that shapes us over the long haul, both individually and collectively. And it's about valuing it enough to create structures that allow it to flourish instead of structures that squelch it. And
I think that's valuable for us to understand, that you being present with other people allows for others to watch you function well in a virtue. They allow you to watch them fail in a virtue. And then just enough time for you to repent, right? And to like turn. And that goes everyone in the community. I don't care if you're the person giving care or receiving care, or it goes back and forth.
Yeah.
It allows everyone to experience that, so that you can say sorry and someone can say, I forgive you, and the vice versa. And those things to occur, it needs like some time. I always found that when someone was barred from our services, and you're supposed to bring that person back in, and we were supposed to kind of have a session with them where it's like, okay, do you acknowledge what you've done? And then, the infraction of what you've done, you have to say it. I need to hear you say that and then it's kind of like you have to conjure up a confession booth, it's like forcing someone to confession and then making that happen, that acknowledgement happen. And there's probably good things for that as well. But in a way, there needs time to breathe, for us to be in the same space, for someone to say, I'm sorry for that. And there's another person to say, and even more time sometimes for someone to say, I forgive you for that, and that needs time. And it's hard when you institute rules that function in that kind of finite way, in community settings, where, it is different. You kind of are. I know we're not supposed to be friends with clients or whatnot, but there's friendships that birth. There are trusting relationships that go beyond that professional capacity. It just happens in these types of settings. And so to ignore that's actually happening on a real level with somebody, and then to suddenly turn on your hat, well, I'm a worker, so this is what happens. Like, it's hard to switch between those two fields. It's actually very confusing to go from someone and saying, I'm like your older brother here, and then to move on to suddenly to say, no, I'm actually your worker, so we can't do that. Or like, it's to move between those lines is very hard.
It's very hard. And I mean, I guess our context is slightly different in that we were always actively encouraged to have friendships with people.
Okay.
Oh,
you guys have it so good there.
Than the other way around. But I mean, there's all kinds of difficulties and tensions that come with that. Like, we've had to deal with situations over the years that came from not knowing where the boundaries were or what. I mean, I think presence can be kind of tampered by too much rigid distance, imposed professional boundaries. But it can also be squelched by sometimes we'll have people who come and just jump in way over their heads in a relationship with someone that you would actually never do in any other context in your life. You wouldn't invite someone to come live with you that you had just met, for instance. People will do that because they think that friendship is like, it's partly a mission for them, right?
Yeah.
It's like friendship evangelism used to be. Well, is that real friendship at all if your end game is something other than navigating a relationship and letting it develop in the way that relationships develop? Sometimes people come in just wanting so much to be a friend to the marginalized, where like, that's not actually how friendships work.
Yes.
And are you seeing that person as the marginalized, or are you seeing that person as the person that they are, and that might not want whatever it is you're offering them? And so learning what actual friendship means and what's appropriate in a given context based on the person that you're developing a friendship with, based on the context of where your relationship started. Figuring out all of those things is not easy, which is why it's best done in community.
Over time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Rachel. This is a lot of ideas generated from what you were saying, and thinking about the way in which we are formed. So I appreciate your time and being able to share with this. It's a precious gift.
Thank you.